weather the last 2 days. That's another craze I have. We've been able to sleep with the windows open, and it's nice and comfortable. So this is our third week in our series in the Psalms. If you remember, we've been talking about the fact that we are emotional beings, right? God gave us emotions. They are gifts from God. Some emotions we like and we seek after, things like joy. Some things we try to master, like anger. Some emotions we flee, like sadness. Today we're going to talk about hope. As we've gone through these weeks, we have talked about different types of songs. And this, if you remember right, I told you this comes from biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann, who classifies songs in 3 ways. Songs of orientation, those praise songs about joy that we talked about that first week. Those songs that are written when the psalmist feels like everything is right with the world, God is in his place in heaven, and everything is going just like it's supposed to go. And so the psalmist pours out praise to God for the way the world is. Last week, though, we talked about songs of disorientation, what we might also call songs of lament. Songs that are written for those times when life is not going the way that we wish it would go. For those times when we are dealing with emotions of anger and sadness and fear and perhaps even hatred and revenge. Those times when we need to call out to God for things to change. Life takes us through ups and downs, and today we're going to talk about songs of new orientation. These are those songs that were written after someone had gone through a time of darkness and despair and come out the other side. After God had heard their cry for help, had heard their lament, and now new joy and new thanksgiving comes. Surprise for the new situation and thanksgiving for God's work. Those times when there is hope again. But now there are some things that we need to think about when we think about hope. Hope often comes after darkness. Hope is often that emotion we feel when we have been in a dark valley of despair or depression. And we look up and we finally see the sun start to peek over the horizon. You know, I, in the last couple of weeks, have had kind of one of those moments. Many of you know that my mom died about 1.5 years ago. And that was also the same year that we were moving, selling the building and moving. And so I was worried about all of you because I care about you. And we were remodeling at home, which meant everything was in chaos at home as well. But I had a realization about a week ago. I realized that I've turned a corner. That I can now think about my mom and not want to cry. That I can now think about my mom and remember the wonderful woman that she was. Not that I won't ever want to cry again, but right now I feel like I've turned that corner, like I see hope that this darkness is going to lift. And so, in these Psalms of reorientation, God has acted in response to whatever was going on. And so the psalmist offers this song of thanksgiving from deliverance from whatever the crisis was. Sunday's coming. But in hope, we realize that resurrection comes after the crucifixion and the grave. Hope often comes out of darkness. Also, it can take a long time to get to hope. The first phrase of our translation of this psalm says, I waited patiently. A better translation would be, I waited and waited and waited. And there are two reasons we often have to wait. Sometimes it takes a long time for the situation that we're in to change. God's timing is not always our timing. And things don't always turn around as quickly as we would like them to, right? But secondly, even when things begin to turn around, it can take a while for our disposition to change, for our outlook to change, for us to be in a place where we can feel hope again. Sunday is coming, but the disciples had to wait through Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, and Holy Saturday to get to Sunday. Also, hope doesn't mean that everything is like it was before. These are pictures of Puerto Rico, the same area before and after Hurricane Maria. Just because we get to hope does not mean that everything is going to be as it was. Hope is celebrated with a backdrop of the trouble that we have come through. Indeed, Sunday is coming, but Jesus as resurrected was changed. Remember that when Mary goes to the garden in the morning, she doesn't recognize Jesus. She thinks he's the gardener at first. Somehow, and we don't know how exactly, but somehow he's different. He's alive again, but he's not the same as he was. And when Mary reaches out to touch him, Jesus says, don't hold on to me. Mary's hope is that Jesus is alive. We can go back to the way that we were. We can sit around the campfire and have breakfast. We can meet in the upper room and laugh together and talk. But Jesus realizes that things are going to be different. Even later that day, Jesus walks from Jerusalem to Emmaus with some of his disciples, and they don't recognize him. So Jesus, in some way, is changed. We hope. We hope for an end to grief, for the whole of the loved one that we lost is still there. We hope for a better world, for an end to racism and nationalism and greed and selfishness and xenophobia and homophobia and misogyny. But we still have to live with the consequences of the past. We hear amazing stories of people who come out of gangs or skinhead groups or the KKK and how they turn their lives around and learn how to lead a life of hate. But the people that they hurt before are often still hurt. We could change our immigration policies this afternoon, but we are going to be dealing with traumatized children for years. Just because we get to a place of hope doesn't mean that things go back to the way that they were. We will not be who we were, but we can be something new. And I think this is a message we as the church need to hear. The church cannot go back to the way it was in the 1950s. It's not going to happen. Thomas Wolfe wrote a famous book called You Can't Go Home Again. And that's true. You can't. Things change. But new life can rise from the ashes of what was. Hope reminds us that we are free, not just from whatever trouble we were in, but that hope frees us for new possibility. new life. That out of the ashes of the forest fire that has ravaged our life, there is signs of life. Also, Sunday's coming, but we are resurrection people. Hope is based on the power and presence of God. God is the one who resurrected Jesus. God's presence can transform any situation. God is the one who hears and answers our cries of despair. Yes, evil is present in the world, but we don't have to fear it. Despair is not all-powerful, and evil will not have the last word. These songs are written from a place where the psalmist's relationship with God has been sorely tested. But the psalmist has come through and realized that God is profoundly reliable and powerful. Also, our hope can give others hope. Sunday's coming, but the story didn't stop on Sunday with the resurrection, did it? Jesus met with his disciples and he said, I'm passing it on to you. Go into all the world and make disciples. Go into all the world and be my presence, be my body. Sunday's coming, but the story doesn't end with the resurrection. Our hope can give others hope. We are called to testify, to tell others where they too can find God. Chris did that beautifully for us today. Showed us a place where he saw God at work in a powerful way. And how did that make you feel when you heard that? Encouraged, right? It reminded you, I hope, of God's faithfulness in your life as well. Sharing the good news strengthens the community. That's part of what we do in Prayers for the People, to share those places where we see God at work. We need to tell our story so that others can praise God as well. And that means we need to practice hope. We need to practice an awareness of what God has done. And we need to interpret our lives in light of God's faithfulness. In cultivating an awareness of God's action and faithfulness, that helps us to find those places where God is at work. We have a tendency, if we are not intentional, of just going through life on autopilot. Our brains can only process so many things, and if we are not intentional, we just go through life and we don't even notice all those places where God is at work. That's why we need to practice becoming aware. We need to practice things like mindfulness and meditation and prayer, perhaps even yoga, things that help us slow down and review where God's at work in our life and where God is at work in the world. But then we need to make meaning of our life. We need to interpret what's going on in our life. We need to understand that those good things that happen aren't fate or karma or coincidence, but that it's God's faithfulness that is present in our lives. We need to surround ourselves with others who are seeking to make meaning from their lives as well. That's one of the reasons it's so important that we gather together, so that we can encourage and support one another. When we come together and worship, we are reminded of God's goodness through the ages. As we study our Bibles, we read stories of God's faithfulness to our ancestors. As we have conversation with one another, we hear stories about God's faithfulness in the here and now. Trust in God is developed one small, faithful experience at a time, over a lifetime. Paying attention each time to what God is doing and thanking God for the way that God has been at work in our lives. Practice hope. Sunday is coming. Amen. We're going to